This is a bonus episode here on the Beyond Jaws podcast as we bring you every once in a while when we see some pretty cool people doing some pretty cool things. We like to have them on and talk to them. And although we may not be able to get them for an entire hour like we normally do and dive into their career just yet, we want to highlight some of the things that they've been able to accomplish so quickly in their career and a particular project or a report. In this case, this is a podcast on podcasting. We're going to be talking to Mark Packer from the Shark Trust, who they just launched a podcast. They just finished up their first series of the Shark Trust podcast, talking about everything that Shark Trust does. And it's an amazing podcast. And we want to have him on to be able to talk about why it started, why they're doing it, how it's going, and when their next series starts. So we're going to talk about that on this episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. This is a bonus episode, and we're going to be talking to Mark Packer of the Shark Trust, talking about their podcast, the Shark Trust podcast. And I'm your co-host, Andrew Lewin, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. David Ebert. Dave, you ready to talk about podcasting on this podcast?
Absolutely. I love when these podcasts come out like this. And of course, people, Paul Cox, Allie Hood, and Kat Gordon are all, good friends of the show here. And when I saw this podcast popped up, I thought we got to have Mark on here to talk about podcasting, because it's like our favorite topic to talk about. And it's another wonderful show they have out, another terrific podcast. And it was a terrific interview, and Mark had a lot to say. And so we're hoping everybody will enjoy this bonus episode, doing a bit of dive into the new Shark Trust podcast.
Absolutely. This is going to be a lovely one. I hope that you guys are going to enjoy it. So here's the interview with Mark Packer from the Shark Trust, talking about the Shark Trust podcast, sorry. Enjoy the interview, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Mark, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about sharks and podcasting?
There is nothing better than talking about that, so I can't wait.
Right on.
Well, welcome everyone to a special bonus episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Today we have Mark Packer, who's the host of the Shark Trust podcast. It's a new podcast that was recently launched in May of this year, and it delves behind the scenes of shark and ray conservation. Mark is a marine conservation and a qualified nurse specializing in mental health, which those of us in the field could use a lot of mental health help here.
Sure.
But he has a huge passion for the natural world with a focus on the marine environment and sharks in particular. Mark received his MSc in Marine Conservation from the University of Plymouth in 2021, and he started with the Shark Trust in 2022, covering a number of different roles from fundraising to engagement and science communication, and most recently now, the new Shark Trust podcast. And Mark has an aim to drive positive change at the intersection of environmental and mental well-being, benefiting both people and the sharks. And Mark, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So I have to ask you, though, how did you get interested in marine conservation and sharks in particular? How did you first get interested in that?
I think probably quite similar to a lot of people who work in natural sciences. My kind of passion came from childhood. So when I was a kid, I was watching Steve Irwin, Steve Backshall on TV, and I kind of loved the natural world. I always had a sister who would take us out in the garden looking for newts and frogs and slow worms. So I kind of always had it in my mind as something I was really interested in. But then when it came to studying and at school, it wasn't necessarily something that was on my radar, because I was like, I'm probably not smart enough to do that. I grew up in a little village in the countryside. There's no sharks or sea near me. So I was like, I'm not going to be doing that. So instead I went into nursing, worked in that for a number of years, and I did absolutely love it. And then I was running a half marathon, and I saw a guy who was also running it. He ran for the Shark Trust. He's now my boss.
We know Paul.
Spoke to him a bit.
Yeah.
So I kind of learned a bit more about sharks. I started following the Shark Trust, learned more and more about it, and I was just like, they are so cool. I always liked sharks when I was a kid. I had a book that I'd read weekly, so I was kind of obsessed. I just didn't really know that they were in the trouble that they are in. So kind of learning about that, I then became a bit more passionate about it. And then, in 2021, I think it was just after like working as a nurse during COVID, and I was like, I just want to do something that I enjoy and something that I'm really passionate about. And I went back to university, studied marine conservation, and got a job at the Shark Trust coming out of it. So
that's amazing. What a story.
Yeah, and this all came from, like, you were out doing a half marathon. You met Paul Cox while you were running.
Yeah. And then I went to fundraise for the Shark Trust a couple of years later, and I'm quite competitive. Like, young, like athletic guy, I was like, I'm gonna do really well at here. And I still remember at mile 10 when Paul and his wife overtook me, and I was just like no, I'm not saying Paul's old, but he's older than me. I was like, how's this guy overtaking me? And I was like trying to catch up with him, trying to talk to him to slow him down. It didn't work at all, and he still beat me.
That's awesome. So did you guys hatch the plan right there? It's like, I'm gonna go back to school, and when I come out, you got a job at the Shark Trust. Or did you guys just keep in touch from there?
We kind of kept in touch a little bit. Like, I followed him on social media. I'd message every now and again, and then the marine conservation course at the University of Plymouth, they have almost like a Dragon's Den bit at the end. So people from different organisations will come in. You have to create like a fake NGO, basically, with other people in your cohort, and then people who lead actual NGOs come and assess it. Okay. So the course is kind of partly designed by people who are already in the industry. So it's you're being taught what is needed. Paul came and gave a couple of talks during that, and the moment I saw him come in, I was like, "Hey, Paul, do you remember me? It's Mark. I want a job at the end of this." And then, funnily enough, so I was still nursing during the masters. I was still working full time as a nurse, just because you got to work to kind of
for sure,
right? Yeah, you got to work,
But the course was full time during the week, so I was working night shifts, and then in Paul's workshops, and I've just been like, I want a job here at the end of it. I fell asleep in both of his.
Oh no!
But luckily, the bits where I was awake, I showed enough passion and dedication that he was like, "Yeah, I still want you in my team."
That's awesome. Now, joining a team like the Shark Trust, it's a great nonprofit organization. You coming out with this master's in marine conservation, did you just be like, was there jobs available, or did you kind of go in and be like, hey, I want to work with you, and Paul had the idea, or people at the Shark Trust had an idea of a position that they were thinking about? How did it all work out?
My kind of end goal was going to be the Shark Trust. That's always kind of where, when I came onto the course, that's where I wanted to be. Right. So I kind of thought, if I get there in 5 years, 10 years time, long-term plan, I'm quite happy with that. And when we're coming to the end of the course, you start looking at jobs, because you're like, I'm going to need a job in 3-6 months time. I'll start looking around. Yep. I was looking around at all these various ones, and a job actually came up as a fundraising assistant at the Shark Trust. And I was like, it might not be my ideal end goal. I was like, but I'm already working there. I'll be learning stuff. And then that might set me up in the future to apply for another job within the Shark Trust that would kind of be more suited to what I want to do in the future. And that's basically what happened. I joined, and then my job has slowly kind of adapted. So I still kind of have that fundraising element, which kind of gives me a lot of skills for the future anyway. I never realised how important fundraising and all the financial planning that, Paul's doing as CEO, how important that is for a charity and conservation work. So kind of seeing how that works, learning those skills, I think has been really helpful. And then I've kind of gone into this more kind of outreach engagement and science communication added into that. I kind of get the best of all the worlds, if that makes sense.
For sure. Well, now, and obviously too, when you do communication, there is fundraising involved. It's part of the fundraising aspect. I've seen a lot of jobs that come up, and it's fundraising and communications coordinator or manager, things like that. It's pretty related, especially when you look at a nonprofit organization, right?
Yeah. And I think so I'd only known Paul, and I knew of Ali I'd seen her on Twitter. And at the Shark Trust. So when I applied, like I thought the Shark Trust was like 200 odd people. Like I thought it was this like huge, big organization. Like I'm always seeing on Twitter. I'm always seeing like all the things that they're doing. I thought there were loads of them. And then when I joined, I was like, there's only 10 of you? Like, and then you look at everyone's job roles and everyone's doing so much work, all bits of everything. Like, yeah, it was amazing really. But it kind of benefits me a bit because it means I can do a bit of everything and learn all these new skills from everyone. Right. Which is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, and of course, Paul, he was on the show about a year and a half or so ago when they had the Sharks International, and he comes from a banking background, actually, and then now he's running the Shark Trust. So that had to have been. I think that may have. Do you think that may have helped at all? The fact that he didn't go through certainly a traditional trajectory from to marine conservation to science. He came from a very different background, similar to you, but he basically got into following his passion, and when he got involved with the Shark Trust. Do you think that may have helped at all?
I think so. I think maybe having that, like Paul has that outlook. It's not, do you know everything in the world about sharks? It's what are your skills? What will that bring to the team?
Right.
And how can we kind of use it as a whole team? So I think kind of him understanding that, I mean, my skills, although I've got a self-taught knowledge of sharks, like I don't have a background in marine biology or marine sciences, but my skills in mental health nursing is how to talk to people. Like that was my job for 8 years. That's kind of what I specialize in. And he was like, well, if you want to end up in science communication, those are the skills we're going to use. And then he would help me develop that into science communication opposed to like therapy and stuff like that. So yeah, I think Paul having that different background helped as well, because it's kind of like a figurehead, like kind of to look up to, and you're like, if he can do it, so can other people. And that's actually kind of gone through the Shark Trust, because there's quite a few of us who have now got different backgrounds, like whether it's languages or journalism and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've said that for years, though. It really helps when you have people from different professional backgrounds come together, especially with a nonprofit organization. I mean, having someone as the CEO of a nonprofit organization that used to be in banking obviously understands money and understands how to run a business. And I think that's really important. So it'll be important, when other people come from different backgrounds and share the same passion, when it comes to, the Shark Trust and sharks. So I think that's really great to see. So that's definitely an advantage.
I think something you said too, Mark, and I know we stress a lot of times when we interview guests on here, is particularly younger people listening that are getting started, in that it learns skills, because the more skills you have, like I have graduate students come into the program, like at Moss Landing, and I'm like, I can teach you all about sharks. Don't worry about that. I don't care, what you know. If you don't know anything about sharks when you come in here, what I'm more focused on, and most people will tell you, is what skills do you have? Are you a diver? Can you run a boat? What kind of analytical skills do you have? And even things that you may not think about in the field, that just other things that may not seem not relevant to what you're doing, but they actually could have some potential skill. They could be applicable to the field. So what you said about having skills, I think, is really an important point. And people listen to this, something to hope they pick up on, like just whatever skills you can learn would be really helpful, and then they can teach about sharks. And so, speaking of which, have you picked up a lot about sharks since you've been there? More than I assume you have.
So much. What I thought the shark world and shark conservation world was like, it was literally like a tip of an iceberg, and then I still think I'm still on the tip, if I'm honest. I don't think I've gone below the waves yet.
There's a lot to learn. There's definitely a lot to learn. I was the same way. I was not a shark person. Like, I love sharks, but obviously I wasn't specialized in sharks like a lot of the people we've had on this podcast, and of course Dave. But you start to learn, you start to pick up a lot, and you learn a lot about different sharks as you go along. Even just the amount of different sharks. When you're talking to this guy who's like the lost shark guy, and hearing all the different species that he discovered and knows about, it's insane how much information is there.
Oh yeah. So you got into your role there with the Shark Trust. how'd the podcast come about? How'd that all come about?
So I've always absolutely loved podcasts. Like I listen to them constantly, whether it's educational or I could just listen to fictional ones. So I'm like quite a big podcast kind of lover anyway. And then when I joined the Shark Trust, I kind of had this view of what marine conservation or shark conservation was. And I thought I knew quite a lot about it because I thought I was quite informed. Like anything like a charity or an organisation's releasing, like I'll read their press release. I'll then go and read some like backing papers and stuff they've done. I'm like, I've got the hang of this. Like I'm very informed. And then when I joined here and just kind of talking to Ali Hood, who's been working here like 20 odd years, this huge background, and she'll start explaining stuff to me and I'm just like, oh my God, like the depth and complexities of how shark conservation actually works is ridiculous. And she'll talk to me for hours. She'll be like drawing me diagraphs of how it works, try and help me understand it. And I was like, if I thought I knew how it worked and I very clearly didn't, there's probably loads of other people that do as well. And I was like, if we want people to kind of support campaigns, support us in protecting sharks, we can give them more information through the use of podcasts, because podcasts can be a lot longer. You can go into a lot more depth, and people, if they've had enough, they could click pause and stuff like that. So I was like, this is kind of more kind of focused for people who want to know more about shark conservation, and then they can look at how it actually works behind the scenes and then how they can get more involved. So kind of using the Shark Trust and the work that they've done to kind of explain how international fisheries work, how you get like a catch limit on a shark, and then how the governments process that, how they agree that, what an exception ends up for another country, how they all work, and how different programs get set up, how we all work together. So the podcast is kind of a way to kind of go into all these complexities in so much detail.
And so when you have people, what kind of topics do you have when you have people on? Like, does it kind of vary, or can you talk about some of the different topics you've had so far in some of your episodes?
So kind of the first series, we kind of did this kind of focus on the Shark Trust. So I kind of spoke to each person here about their roles, maybe the program that they're focusing on, how it works, just so they can kind of give us that top layer of it. And then in the later series, we can go kind of more and more in deep detail, giving kind of live updates of things that are happening. Yeah. So like the first episode, we're meeting with Paul Cox, the CEO, who was on here before, and he kind of gives this kind of massive overview of the world of shark conservation, how the Shark Trust works, and kind of the threats that sharks are facing. And then the next episode, we kind of go for like this deep dive into international fisheries and policy with Ali Hood, our director of conservation. She's got the kind of brain that you want to like plug a USB into and just kind of download it all and just hope that you can get it, because when she talks to you, you know you're only getting like 2% of what's in there, or probably not even that. And like her episode, we actually had to stop it because the cameras were going to run out of battery. But you don't want it to stop because she's saying so much stuff. And you're just like, give me more. So we're going to do a couple more episodes, and that's still just skimming the surface. But there's so many amazing things she talks about in international fisheries, and how working with companies to get different protections in kind of works. And there's all stuff that you don't necessarily see from the kind of public facing side of shark conservation. And then in episode 3, I talked to Jack Rennick. He's kind of our fisheries officer, and that kind of goes straight into UK fisheries, kind of like more localized. So Ali's kind of more the international level, and then Jack's kind of comes onto this kind of regional level with the UK and then also the EU, and looking at the other complexities and organisations in that. Because I think Ali's focused kind of like on like the countries. Yep. And then when you go to Jack's one, suddenly you're looking at different organisations.
Yep.
because obviously it's just the UK. But
yeah, for sure.
You're looking at, the government ones, whether it's the Marine Management Organisation, DEFRA, then you're looking at other stakeholders like anglers, and it's just this kind of whole host, and it shows that like it looks really complex from the start, and then when you get in, you're like, oh, this is even more complex.
Yeah. Well, and we also don't hear a lot about the UK fisheries internationally, right? I'm sure that it's talked about within the UK, but for someone living in Canada, or for Dave living in the US, you don't hear a lot being spoken about the UK fisheries. I discovered a little bit more just during my other podcast, How to Protect the Ocean, but you don't. It's nice to hear people from within just kind of talk about it, frankly, and just be like, this is where we're at. This is the basics and how it's kind of divided up, and here are the NGOs that work within it and some of the government departments. It's nice to have that ability to be able to talk about that and get a basics in it right off the bat.
Yeah, and I think being able to talk about it, and then like in the future, I'd love to be able to go and talk to people in other countries, that organizations in other countries that manage it there. Like we've got partners all around the world that work in shark conservation. I'll be like, well, how does it work there? How's that different from the UK? What can we do to kind of work together to make them all kind of come together and kind of sing from the same hymn sheet, so that we can get this positive future for sharks.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Now, with that said,
no, go ahead, Andrew.
With that said, you're looking at expanding it. You just finished up the first series, and I think it's a great first series. What's the plan in the future? And then I guess with this first series, as an organization, you're trying to say, put out this podcast. Let's see how it does. Let's see if it's a benefit. How would from an I've done it from an independent point of view, on my own as a passion. Dave and I, we do this, to get we have certain goals that we want to be able to accomplish, but we're also not affiliated necessarily with any organization. And then this podcast is not affiliated necessarily with any organization. So for the Shark Trust podcast, how is it evaluated from a podcasting perspective?
I think there's different aspects to kind of look at it, because there's kind of you can look at it from the metric side, how many downloads it had, how much engagement. But I think kind of our vision of the podcast is to talk about how our work works, and that's not necessarily just for the benefit of us.
Of course,
we've got supporters who donate to us every month. We've got we might have major donors who will come and talk to us to help support our work. And the podcast is just one kind of way that we can talk about what we work. We can tell them what the money that they've donated and they've given us is supporting in kind of that kind of detail, opposed to us sending them an email which might be 400 words, or an infographic being this is what we've done this year. We could be this is the detailed work of what we've done this year in a digestible way, discussing kind of the complexities, so that what you've helped achieve. And I think the beauty of podcasts is that you can use them for more than one thing. It's not just a podcast, it's multi-purposed. We can use episodes of the podcast as presentations. We can use it for our social media. We can use it to help with getting grants, helping apply for other things. So it's having this kind of multi-purposed kind of tool almost that benefits not only us but everyone who wants to support us or learn about shark conservation.
Absolutely.
And
I love that. I think that's the way to do it. You get to know, as a listener, I get to know the people who work within the Shark Trust, which is a lot of fun for me. But to hear in detail, and sort of a raw fashion too, right? It's not a BBC podcast. It's not. It's these are two people having a frank conversation, a fun conversation about the work that they do, and I love that because you can hear the passion in Paul's. In Paul's voice. You hear the passion in Ali's voice. You hear that. I think you just had Rachel on, and I think you mentioned, who was it? The Jack.
Jack.
When you hear their voice, you hear the passion in their voices of how they're talking about how much they know. All of a sudden, if you decide to going to donate to anywhere, that if you're listening to that podcast on a regular basis, you'd be like, well, I'm hearing what they're saying. Like, I'm hearing what the Shark Trust does each and every episode. So this is kind of giving my update. I don't need an email, which I probably won't read anyway. And you're not going to give as much detail in. I'm going to put it in the podcast. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate of this way of doing it for an organization. And I think this is the way, I just think that this is the way to go forward, and to get more information out there about the work that you do, because the Shark Trust does a lot of work, just not only on with the was it 10 people you said that work directly for it, but then you have partners and collaborators that work as well that you can feature and be able to discuss that type of information. So I love that. Yeah, that's the way it should be done. That's the way it should be done. Sorry, Dave. I think I cut you off when you first started.
No, I was just going to say, I think I really got into the whole podcast thing. How I got into it is Andrew invited me on his podcast about 7 years ago now or so. I'd never done a podcast. Yeah. I came on and him and I just hit it off like amazing. We ended up speaking longer off air than we did on air, and I was totally hooked after that. And then he kept inviting me back on until it was like, hey, why don't we actually start our own podcast? Is kind of how we got into doing the whole. Oh yeah, doing our whole story. That's literally how it got. I never had any idea I'd ever done a podcast. I really didn't know much about them, and now I'm totally into it and I'm totally hooked on it. So it's and I think as Andrew was saying, the whole communication part of it is just, I think it's great because you can have it's like now we can have a conversation to learn more about what you're doing about the Shark Trust, and with our show we like to get to know the people behind doing the program. Like yourself, like how'd you, obviously you said you're really into the podcast realm anyway, and so it was a nice opportunity for you to get in and actually be able to host your show. So on your individual shows, Mark, do you have about how long do they go? Like they sort of like whatever, like 30, 45 minutes generally, and then you have these mini episodes?
Yeah. So I'd say like most episodes are going to be between 30 and 40 minutes because we do video versions as well, and so we're limited by battery as well of cameras. So it means ours are usually between 30 and 45, and then some colleagues of mine, so me, Louis, who does all of our like content creation, so making our videos, doing a lot of our social media stuff, and then Caroline, who's our marketing manager. We went up to Go Diving, which is like a dive show in Coventry. We went up there and a lot of our patrons were there giving talks, and we were like, we're about to start a podcast. I was like, we can talk to them, we can get them on our podcast, and they have like limited time because they are giving talks on stage to loads of people, and we're like, if you can give us 10 minutes, come on, talk to us about your favorite diving experience, because we're kind of looking at the different audiences that there are in shark conservation, different ones that you'd want to target. And I'm always I've always got Paul's voice in the back of my head, and they're like, who is your target audience here? Yeah. And then make sure you get it to them. And I was like, those little episodes are either for people who are really passionate about diving with sharks already, that have got hundreds and hundreds of dives in, or people who have never dived before and they're contemplating it. And I think once you have been in the water with a shark, you're always going to want to conserve them. Like, it's always something you're going to want to do. So like I kind of got into sharks, and I couldn't actually swim. I was scared of the sea. Like this was like back in 2015 when I met Paul. I couldn't swim, terrified to go in the water in case I'd drown. And then I went in the water with sharks for the first time a couple of days ago. It's just on Friday. My girlfriend had paid for her family and me to go on a blue shark snorkel trip.
Okay.
And it was the first time I've been, like, they've said blue sharks are inquisitive, and I've said it in talks for the last 2 years. Yeah. I did not know what that word meant. Like, they are up in your face, they're swimming around you. And there's this a code of conduct developed by Mariko, and Kat, who works here, helped with developing it. And like, they follow obviously this code of conduct, and one of them is you cannot do not touch the sharks, which was obviously, that's kind of, I thought, oh, that's obvious. they get so close to you. Like, I'm not touching the shark, but it's touching me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think,
it's amazing how close they can swim to you and not touch you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely incredible experience. And I was like, if we can get people to talk about those experiences that they have had and that kind of passionate way that they can get it across, people are going to want to learn more and more about sharks, and then hopefully they'll listen to the other episodes, start learning about how shark conservation works, how they can get involved. So yeah, those bonus mini episodes are probably about 10 minutes maximum. And we've got like Monty Halls, Miranda Krestofnikov, Simon Rogerson, and Donovan Lewis. So amazing people.
Yeah. And you just finished your first season now?
Yeah, so our final episode went out today, so recording it on the 23rd of July. Went out, and that was an interview with Rachel Brooks, who's, again, an amazing kind of background. She's studied zoology, went and, I think, learnt to dive and stuff in Egypt, went to the Canary Islands, and then she's ended up in Scotland. She's become this wildlife artist, scientific illustrator, and she was doing Bass and Shark with Bass and Shark Scotland. And she's just got this huge, amazing knowledge, and then she's also got that creative background. So talking to her about Bass and Sharks, it kind of comes out in this like really creative, kind of almost poetic way. So we've just done an episode of her to kind of finish the season, because Bass and Sharks are probably the UK's most iconic species, or most well known at least. So we were just like, we'll end on a high of this one with Rachel, and it's Bass and Shark season right now. So it's just kind of beautiful.
Oh, good. And you said in your episodes, you have episodes like one every other week, and then you have your mini episodes kind of scattered between those.
So we put them out every other week. So yeah, bi-weekly, and then if we have a bonus mini episode, we'll chuck that in just as like a nice little nugget of information that people can have in the middle. And then we're going to take a short break at the moment, just because we've just finished series 1, and then go in series 2, where we're kind of looking more at what successful shark conservation means, and then what the impacts that can have. So everyone likes to talk about shark conservation in this like really positive light, but I want to look at the positives and the negatives of shark conservation, because if we're able to identify those, then we're not going to take step backs, because we can prepare for those negative things. We're talking about like depredation, where, you know, people who spend the most amount of time by the sea, you know, they're angling and stuff like that. If their favourite hobby is getting ruined because the sharks are stealing their fish, and they go and talk to, you know, here it'd be like an MP, those are the people who make the decision. So if we're able to look at these potential future issues and then make steps to mitigate them, then shark conservation can keep going forward instead of taking those steps backwards.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's cool, Mark. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on today to talk a little bit about your new podcast, and we wish you all the best. And we're definitely going to have you come on. I'd like to have you come back on here, and we'll do more of a focused episode on you, the Mark Packer story. And we look forward to that. And we wish you all the best of luck on the Shark Trust podcast, and hope he does very well, and best of luck to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us on this episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast, a bonus episode. Really love the fact that we talked about podcasting, Dave. I think this is something that we would want to talk more about with other podcasts. And I think it's, you know, jumping into it as I love podcasts, I think it's really great that we're able to see more of these platforms, more podcasts on this platform, be able to be published, and so more people can listen to it. You know, a lot of people would think, oh, well, you guys already have a podcast. Don't you want anybody else to do it? It's like, absolutely. Not everybody identifies with us. We have a very different mission than what the Shark Trust podcast has, and we like to support other podcasts as much as possible. So, Dave, you know, from an organizational perspective, you know, being able to launch a podcast like this, What do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea for the Shark Trust?
Oh yeah, no. To me, it seemed like a natural extension for those of us in the field that attended the Sharks International a year and a half ago, and actually it was in Valencia, Spain. But the week before that, they had an online version where they interviewed people, and Paul Cox, the CEO, and Ali Hood had people. It basically was run like a ongoing TV show where they'd come on, talk about the presentations that people had just seen because it was online at the time, and then the following week when they had the in-person conference, it was the same thing. It was all virtual. You could go online if you were subscribed to or you had attended the conference and watch the podcast and watch what wasn't a podcast, it was a video series. And so this seemed like the natural extension to me, that they would just go from there to doing a podcast, and they get in, they talk with the different people, different aspects, like Mark talked about today. I thought it was interesting. He's was very into podcasting himself. Didn't see himself ever actually hosting one, and now he is. So It was kind of cool hearing that story. I have to say, it was kind of funny. I thought when he talked about how he met, this to me was, we'll have to get into this when you have him back on here in the future, about how he met, literally, he was running a half marathon, and he met Paul Cox while he was running. And he commented how he was trying to beat Paul in the race, and Paul ended up beating him, which is probably a good thing. Probably, if he would have won, he may not be sitting here today, help him get a job. But I thought it was one of the more interesting ways somebody actually connected with someone who eventually became their boss, and with an organization that he's now with. Who would have thought, a couple of years ago, what that would lead to? And so I thought that was a fascinating story in itself. How you never know how you end up getting in some of these different positions in the shark world. And I thought he had that was such an interesting story. And I think that the fact that Paul also came from a non-science background, and now he runs the Shark Trust, probably helped him a bit, as he said in the interview, about getting on there. But it was I think the key thing was skills, all the skills that he had that really helped him get into the position he's in. And I think that's something we do emphasize with a lot of the people when we talk with Andrew and we interview, is about they'll almost always come back something about learning skills, because we can teach about sharks and stuff, but if you have the skills, that's what's going to help get you in the door for graduate school, or even for a position sometimes.
100%. I think that's something that needs to increase. We need to see more of these types of podcasts, and need to see more of this type of education get around. A lot of people know a lot about sharks from different episodes and like Shark Week and Shark Fest, but we know those are catered towards a specific audience, and there's an audience that wants to know more about conservation and wants to know about shark science and wants to know more about things other than those iconic species and other sharks. And I think you'll get that with the Shark Trust, and I think that's really important. So again, Mark, thank you so much. We'll put all the links to the podcast so that people can get access to it, as well as the Shark Trust website. And Dave, if people want to get a hold of you, how would you do so?
Instagram, it's Lost Shark Guy, Lost Sharks on Facebook, and Lost Shark Guy on X. And of course, I'm also on LinkedIn, Dave Ebert. And please go on our YouTube channel, the Beyond Jaws podcast, and subscribe. And please leave comments. We'd love to hear from you, and just to see what we can do to do for the show. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And Dave, thank you. Mark, thank you very much for the podcast and for coming on ours to talk about your podcast. And we appreciate everybody for listening to this episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. From Dave and I, we thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.